All right, I'd like to welcome Matthew Rosenberg to Comix Asylum. Welcome, Matthew, and how has your 2021 been so far?
Uh, Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I don't know how to answer how my 2021 has been so far. I'm I'm healthy and okay, and that's a big win. I don't really leave my house very much, so that's probably a minus. But I'm working a lot, so I feel very grateful that I can have my job and make comics and things. So all in all, I think I'm doing well, but it's a new kind of well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, you're in New York, I'm in Toronto, so
Mm.
kind of the same kind of city in the setup,
Sure.
transit and all that stuff. Getting used to going back to normal, like taking transit. I
Mhm.
was at a hockey game recently,
Yeah.
and just the crowds. Even though I'm not afraid of them or anything like that. It was just getting used to being around people, and that's something that I'm quite used to being in a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
city.
Yeah, I mean, that's been such a weird thing for me is that like, people asking me to come do signings and come do Comic Cons. And like I there's like so many factors at play because it's like, well, I'm vaccinated. I feel kind of okay about it, but I also feel a little bit anxious about it. But also I don't feel great about encouraging people to meet in like large groups. Like like New York Comic Convention is coming up and it's this week and it's,
Hmm.
5 subway stops from my house. It's like my hometown show. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to do it because I think I don't feel good about asking people to go into that situation to see me. And I understand people would be there no matter regardless of whether or not I'm there. But like I don't feel like I can condone people in that large a scale coming together right now. It doesn't feel safe. I feel like I wouldn't be okay if people got sick or got hurt because of coming to see me. So I have to like weigh that, which is something I've never weighed before in my life. But so it's very strange time for sure.
Yeah, yeah, almost like we're living in a dystopian science fiction.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that a lot. It's funny because we started making this book, which is a dystopian book before the pandemic. And one of the ideas in the book is that it's dystopian, but the characters don't think it's dystopian. They think it's their life. Like it's the world they know. They don't think like everything has gotten horrible. They think this is reality. And that was a big thing we were excited about. And then when the pandemic hit, me and Tyler, who I make the book with, were like, oh, when do you realize that you're in a dystopia? Like who like it was something we had artistically thought about, but then I don't know, I think about it now and I'm just like, this is a weird reality. But you're immediately like, well, this is the new reality or this is the current reality. And you're never, I don't know. It's a very strange thing to be making fiction about a dystopian world and living in what feels very dystopian. I mean, comparatively, I know for a lot of people things feel very normal right now, but for a lot of people they don't, and so it's a bizarre time to be making anything, let alone a book like the one we're making.
For sure. And so tell us what you can without giving away too many spoilers about what's the furthest place from here. Because I love the title. And one thing before
Thanks.
you get started, when you were just talking there, the one thing that struck me was it's not only where you are physically, but where you are mentally and psychologically.
Yeah, exactly. The so what's the furthest place from here is a punk rock dystopian post-apocalyptic coming of age story, set in a world that has ended and all that's left are gangs of children who live in the ruins of our former world. And our story starts when the gang we follow, who live in a record store, um, one of them goes missing, and that's really the inciting incident for the story. And then the gang has to decide if they're going to risk everything and set off to find her, or whether they want to stay in their safety of their record store and their home and keep the status quo as much as they can. So it is a strange, um we call it a coming of age story, and I think people think that means that it's all ages or YA. And I think teenagers can read it. It's not an all ages book. It's kind of dark and kind of violent and pretty weird, but yeah, it's definitely a book about a lot of things, but one of those things is growing up and finding out that the world around you isn't exactly the whole world, like having that bubble of your childhood burst. And so now we're in a time where the world around people is often shrinking, and it's a funny thing to be making this book as the world changes, for sure.
Now, did, I guess, going through the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
inform or change any of the narrative kind of drive that you and Tyler Boss, who's the artist on the book, may have had initially? Or were you just set on, this is our direction, let's go?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's funny because it actually didn't just change it narratively. It changed it in like so many ways, because we've been working on the book for a really long time. We announced it a long time ago, and we we had some, we really wanted to take our time with the book, and we had some work stuff and some life stuff come up for both of us. And when we really were like, okay, we're ready to launch the book, was in January of last year. We were like, okay, let's do a spring release for the book. And we talked to Image about it, and we were working on a timeline, and then everything got upended. And a big thing for us was like comic shops closing and Diamond shutting down. And we had a real panic about, our careers and our future, and the medium we love and the community of comics. And me and Tyler had a long talk about like, well, what do we do when things come back? And our decision was to really change the structure of the book in a lot of ways. We wanted to make it much more of an event. We wanted to make it feel much bigger and much more special. So we combined basically the entire first arc of the book into just a couple issues. And so the first issue is 64 pages, the second issue is 48 pages, the third issue is 48 pages. We wanted people to really get a bang for their buck, and really feel like they got something that was unique. But so the books themselves physically changed in size, and we added pages and rewrote stuff. But then beyond that, like, I mean, the obvious answer is that in issue 4, there's all these different gangs of children, and they all sort of have their own unique aspects. And in issue 4, you were going to meet a gang of children who were all afraid of disease, and they all wore masks and scrubs and suits, and they were like very paranoid. And I was like, oh, that has to go. Like, that doesn't feel like good at all to be putting that into this book now. So that whole chunk disappeared. But more than that, I think a lot of it is just in subtle ways about the way we think of the book. It's an ongoing series, so like thinking about what it means going forward. Like, there's a lot of stuff that I realized that like I wanted to do in the book that you're going to see later on, that like it just changed subtly. But I was like, I don't want to do that. I would rather talk about things this way. And I mean, a big thing for me is the idea of community, and
Right.
taking care of your community, and protecting your community, and having your community care for you, and what it means to be part of a community that does that, and what it means to be part of a community that doesn't do that. Those were like themes in the very back of the book that we pushed forward for sure in the last year and a half.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I would say that we've probably become more tribal in the States and in Canada, whether it's politically, whether it's the virus, how you're going to combat the virus, how you're going to live your life, what's important after going through almost 2 years of a lockdown, and then how entrenched people can become with those ideals, and then how it informs and then determines behavior after that.
Yeah. I think, that's something that I think is fascinating. I think watching people come to decisions based on the people around them, and really like just become entrenched is exactly right. Like, really dig in on things, and like watch it spread to every facet of their life, where like you watch people just become more empathetic or less empathetic to the people around them. You watch people become more risk averse or less risk averse, like, and it becomes really fascinating. Like, I see people who are very much like, I don't understand why you'd do things that that might endanger others. And I watch other people be like, I don't understand why you do things that aren't taking care of yourself at a time like this, like looking out for yourself first and foremost. And seeing those two ideologies at war is just fascinating on a political level. But like when you're trying to, I mean, it becomes the thing of like reality starts to outpace your ability in fiction to keep up, where you're just like, I'm writing this and it feels absurd, and then I see someone say it on Twitter and I'm like, oh no, this is real, like this is what people think. It's a very um it's very rich time to be thinking about this stuff, I think. And I feel both cursed and very lucky to be already doing a book about it.
Yeah, and what I found even within the story with a couple of characters, and then within your own group, like I'll just use my friends and family, how you have like a difference of opinion, and it's almost like you didn't realize that you were dealing with this type of individual. You didn't realize that what was deep inside of their own just their own view of the world and of themselves. And there are a couple of instances in the first issue where you know you're part of a collective, but then individual actions take over.
Yeah, yeah. There's a moment that's later on in the book, that's always been in the book, but to me is like, I feel like, oh, we really hit something that is going to resonate with a lot of people. And like I can't spoil it, but
No.
there's a moment where you find out a character has been doing something for their own self-preservation, for their own good, and they're scared, and they start doing something for their own good, and it is really upsetting and really a betrayal of the group. And it's a hard moment, and it's something that me and Tyler really wrestled with, because we really like the character, and we were like, are we going to do this to them? And I was like, but, and I said, we have to think of it from their point of view. Like, I have to write this and approach this from their point of view. Like, this is a scared person who's going to do what they can to survive, and like they put themselves above others. And like I think that that's understandable. I think that's relatable to a lot of people. And so like, yes, when you're in a group and a collective, and you suddenly, things get it's a test of people. These times are a test of who we really are. And I think that's something we've always been trying to explore, even before the pandemic, in this book, of like, how much does your social circle, how much does your community really influence you, and how much, when everything's on the line, are you your own person above that, for good and for bad. So
yeah, and it's also interesting because I'm thinking of, again, with the characters in the book, you're not quite sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, how long or how far we've been since the initial fall in your story.
Oh yeah.
So you're now set with characters, especially with them being children, who know stuff but don't know what they don't know, right?
Yeah.
And so there are things happening to characters it's apparent, but they're unaware of what's happening. Yeah. And then also how, because they're in a record store, which I found as a fascinating kind of like home base, where that also then leads to some of your tribalism, and also a link to the past, but then how you form identity, through not only just the albums, but also what they think the messages are, either through the album cover or the music.
Yeah. It's funny because when you say post-apocalyptic to people, I think a lot of them assume that like it's right then. It's like, oh, the apocalypse was a week ago and now we're dealing with it. And so a lot of people I find go into the book and they're very caught off guard by the fact that like these kids don't seem to know much about the world before the fall. And like, I had someone just point blank who read it point blank ask me, and we're like, why don't they remember? And I was like, it's not necessarily in their lifetime. And they were like, oh. And I was like, yeah. And the book is interesting because or it's interesting to me at least, we took the time to really embrace mystery in the book, and not spell everything out. There was a point where we were going to have everything explained going in, and have everything laid out, and characters would tell you what the world was and when it happened, and we were even going to have maybe like a title page that explained what happened. And I said, no, let's let the mystery drive things. And I was thinking about, it's less so in comics, I find, but in a lot of like the TV I like, stuff like Lost or Twin Peaks or The Leftovers, things like that, where uh, there's a plot and there's a story that you're following, and that's the main driving force. But these little questions and mysteries of what the world is are the thing that hooks you a secondary way, that they really bring you back. And that's something we wanted. And so the world being a mystery, and what's happening in the world being a mystery, and what people know and what they don't know being a mystery, was a big thing for us. So yeah, there's a funny thing, because you start the book and it's kids in a record store, and you're like, okay, this could be any point in time. And then you step outside and you go, oh, okay, so something has happened. And then as you get more information, you're like, I don't know what's happened, but the kids don't know what's happened. This is their reality. And so there is this interesting connection to the past that we start with, where we give you something that you understand in the record store, and kids hanging out and talking about records. And then you move on and you're like, oh, there's a whole lot of questions here. And so how long things have been this way, and how they got this way, is all stuff we have the answers to. And it's going to be doled out slowly if we feel like you need it. Some of these things we know, but we're like, you may never know the answer to this, and that's okay. um but yeah, there's a fun blend of questions and familiarity that we're playing with, for sure.
And so let's talk about your collaboration with Tyler. Like, you guys are pretty familiar with each other. You've worked on projects before.
Yes.
What was it like after going through previous projects, coming together on this one? Was it a little bit easier, or was it more of like you're able to have that push and pull, the kind of creative push and pull that's needed sometimes to get the best out of something?
you know it's it's funny. Tyler is he's one of my closest friends, and we used to work together in a comic shop before we made comics together. So we're old buddies, and know each other really well. um and we made a book called Four Kids Walk Into a Bank together. He worked on my first creator-owned book, We Can Never Go Home. He colored half of it, did a lot of covers for it. And we've done some shorts together, and various things. And the thing about this book is we've been working on it for a long time, and we actually started it when we were wrapping up Four Kids Walking to the Bank. So we started it a while back, and we started making a book that was very similar to Four Kids Walking to the Bank. We liked making that book. We had a lot of fun doing it. The audience seemed to really respond to it well, and it's an obvious instinct to be like, the audience liked this, let's give them more. And I just had this realization that that's not. I think part of what we liked about making Four Kids Walk Into a Bank was that it was all new to us. We were trying new things, and we were pushing each other, and it felt very fresh. And I feel like that's something, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, the audience reacted to that. Like, we were really challenging each other. And so going and following the playbook of that book again felt like a cop out to me. It felt cheap to be like, let's creatively just follow in the exact footprints we were in. And so, we were decently far along in doing a different book. And I stopped and I said, Tyler, like, let's talk about this. I said, we should really be pushing ourselves. We should really be doing something. And he was very, very into it and very excited. And so it's not falling into the same, it's not an easy groove to get back into. We work together great, but we're not in our comfort zone by choice, because we're like, whereas Four Kids Walk Into a Bank was 5 issues, small, self-contained, real-world crime comedy story, we tried to flip as much of that as we could. So this is an expansive, huge, open world building, science fiction, fantasy adventure that's an ongoing series with like a really large cast and all these complicated rules. And um, we threw out as much of the idea of Four Kids as we could in order to make something as close to Four Kids as we could, if that makes sense. And so every issue of this book is sort of a learning experience to be like, what can we do? How can we change things? And it's been really great, because we took a long time to really experiment. And that's why you get things like the 64-page first issue, because we just kept adding and changing and being like, trying to get exactly the book we wanted to get. Like, it was our first time working together, like it was a first project. And so I'm really proud of it, because it is a complete reinvention of what we've done to get back to the feeling of what we've done, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. And even though it's apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, there is a good deal of humor in it as well too. Some of it is subtle and some of it is right in your face. And there are a couple of moments where, especially during the party scene in the record store, that I was laughing out loud, and it kind of just took me back to my kind of like high school party days.
Yeah, I mean, that's the, like at the end of the day, we were like, this still needs to feel like a book we would make. Like it still has to be funny and have heart and be character driven, and that's always been the core. That was the thing that I was like, we can't get rid of. And I feel weird because the second issue I think is much funnier than the first issue. The first issue we really were like trying to see how funny it could be, and then we sort of settled in a place where I was like, now that we know the world and the rules and there's real stakes, like now I feel like we can sort of deal with the absurdity of these kids in this world. And so the book gets a little funnier as it goes, but it also gets other things. It gets to be more of a horror book, and it gets to be more creepy and weird. So it's all this stuff, like adding ingredients as we go. But yeah, we really wanted to keep that like, yeah, high school vibe of just like, this is high school for these kids, except their high school is, gang fights and hunting for food and, worshiping records and things like that. So there's recognizable elements, but it is its own weird thing for sure.
And there's a parallel with record stores and comic book stores. And so speak to your experience, you and Tyler working in a comic book store, and then how that not only that informs you as a creator, but then also using that as one of the linchpins of your story, but as a record store.
Yeah. I actually, I used to work in a record store too. I've worked in both a comic shop and a record store. And that was always a thing that was funny to me, was that like, it's the same type of person that goes to both, but they're different people. But you're like, you're the same person. Like you who wants a variant cover, and you who wants a record on a weird color vinyl, and you who's looking for the perfect 9.8 CGC cover, and you who's taking the records out of the sleeve and wants to make sure there are no scratches, and like the back issue guys and the folks looking for out of print 7 inches. Like you're the same person. You just don't know it.
I want my bootleg live, U2 or something.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. And I'm both of those people. I'm a big record fan and record collector and comic book nerd my whole life. But I think the thing we were really tapped into, and the thing we really wanted to focus on with this, is like, in the book, all of the gangs of children, they don't live in houses. They live in, they're not businesses necessarily, but they live in structures that were for a purpose. So there's a gang who lives in a bank, and they absorb the purpose of the building. So the gang who lives in a bank sort of are traders, and they hoard things and they collect things. And there's a gang who lives in a police station, and they run around enforcing rules that they've made up, and they're kind of violent and crazy, but to them they're the law. And so every gang has sort of adopted a purpose, and they've rebuilt the world in this image where they don't really understand it. They have a few pieces of the map, and they're rebuilding it, and they're filling in the blanks, and it's all screwy and wrong, but there's some semblance of that. And that was an idea we had early on, and we were really excited about. And I was like, but who would we follow? Like, who is the gang who'd be most interesting? What is the thing? And to me, the obvious answer was like you said, a comic shop or a record store. And we didn't want to do comic shop because that would feel too self-referential. But like, to me, they're a very similar place, and they're a very important place. I think it's changed for younger people, especially in the rise of Spotify or whatever. But like, those are the places, especially for me, and I think for a lot of people, where it's the first chance to go somewhere and assert your taste and assert your identity. I know that someone said to me the other day that I think it was Paul Levitz said, like, the first comic you buy informs the rest of your life. And I'm paraphrasing, but something like that. And I think that's true. I think, you ask people, like, what's the first comic you ever bought? What's the first record you ever bought? And they know. And because it's the first chance as a child where you can look at all these things and be like, something about this speaks to me and I want to find out what that is. And it sets you on a path that is like, I mean, it's overly sentimental, but I think it really is important and magical in a way of like defining who you are. And, you know, for me, it's like, you know, it's punk rock tapes and X-Men comics was like everything. And I was like, this is who I want to be as a person. This
Right.
is like, this is, I understand this speaks to me, and it still does. All that stuff still does, you know, maybe not those exact issues of comics or those exact tapes, but like you just are finding your voice and finding like-minded people, and from there that informs, you know, the people you're going to be friends with and the culture you're going to be into and your belief system. I mean, and I think that's really important. So that's the magic of a comic book shop and a record shop, is something that we were trying to put in here of like, these are kids who've gone down a different path. They've fallen in love with something that isn't a semblance of capitalism or law and order or commerce or anything else. They've fallen in love with art, and they've fallen in love with this idea of art. And then when you add the post-apocalyptic world to it, everyone else is dealing with things that have a concrete value in keeping them alive, theoretically, like rules and commerce and food and all these things. And these are kids who are obsessed with and feel the need to protect something that has no value in keeping them alive. It doesn't keep them safer. It doesn't make their lives better. It's just something important to them that only they understand. And that to me is comic books and art. That's finding something that means the world to you and other people won't understand, is everything that I love about comics and art. It's and music and all that stuff. It's finding your identity in something that's so personal and holding on to that as hard as you can. And so that's, you know, that when that clicked for us early on, we were like, yeah, that's the story. It's kids who live in a record store and guard the records with their lives and put them in the end of the world. So
and it resonates with what's going on now, because you look at when we were having the pencils down and you were afraid the industry was going to grind to a halt.
Mm-hmm.
And we're even dealing still with movies, not quite sure how they're being released. The whole business model is in flux, where there's even infighting with actors and the studios that have really good relationships with each other. But the dearth of any kind of art or escapism compounded what I would say is the mental strain, as well as the health impact of being in the pandemic.
Yeah.
So art is, and you know, I'm biased in saying this too, because I love comics and the medium and all that.
Sure.
But it's super important, and it's vital to the survival of not only individuals but communities.
Yeah. I you know, it's really interesting because I think you know, there's a lot of people talking about this and sort of thinking on it and studying it about sales of books and comics and records and DVDs and video games are through the roof. And, you know, I think the simple answer is like, well, people are trapped in their houses, but I don't think that's entirely it. People are once again remembering how important and how crucial it is to be escaping and to be in love with something that someone made, and to be in love with art. And I think, you know, I know a bunch of people who are like, yeah, I'm reading so much more, I'm reading so many more comics. And I you know, if you ask them, it's like, is it because you're home? And they're like, no, it's because I love it, and it's so important to me, and I'm back in touch with that. And that, I think, is a really, you know, it's a really inspiring, nice thing if you're someone who makes art or sells art. But it's also like, I think it speaks so much to the human experience that we take for granted, that like, yeah, we there's so much like post-apocalyptic fiction that doesn't feature art. And I feel like, yeah, if anything, we've learned that what's not true. That, you know, like, you go back to cavemen and they're making cave paintings. Like, the idea is that, you know, they're struggling to survive every hour of the day, and something's going to eat them and they have to find something to eat. And it's like, they're still going to take the time to make paintings. they're still going to take the time to like express themselves and take in other people expressing their experiences and interpreting them and things like that. And so it's funny because we did the record thing as this very personal thing, but now it's taken on this more heightened importance to us, because I think in the story, because I think we're seeing that, like, oh yeah, people really will cling to their record collections, and people really will, when all else fails, like, people are going to grab their comics and run and things like that. So it's a dark way to find out that we tapped something, but nice moment for us to realize that we weren't wrong in our assessment of what matters to people.
No, you're right. And then also too, I'm just thinking of like records of a certain time, or like the album covers, like comic book covers.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are linked to like a certain time, as I said, or a certain song, or a certain character, or even a certain creator, right? So album covers of a certain era looked great.
Yeah.
And then they went through a period where they didn't look as great.
Uh-huh.
Or maybe the songs were better than the album covers, or the album covers were better than the songs. And I think comics has had that same kind of parallel existence as well too.
For sure. Yeah. I think there's a weird, I remember I went to go see one of my favorite musicians, Ian MacKaye, who was in Fugazi and Minor Threat, and ran Discord Records and runs Discord Records, which is, a huge influence and inspiration to me as a creative person and just in my life and his ethos. And he was asked about, the rise of iTunes, and if iTunes was this great equalizer because everyone's name was the same size and the same font. And he's like, it's your bands and, the biggest bands in the world all get the same, which we found out later isn't true, that it's like, well, some people get placed better and more prominent. And he said, no, that's not. He said, I don't make music to be on an equal footing with other people. I make music to really express a lot of things. And he was like, for me, the answer has always been a 12-inch record, because the art is the biggest and there's a physical item there. And he's like, that's how I visualize my music, and that's how I want it to be. He's like, I don't want to be reduced to a font to be equal. I want to have my art blown up as big as I can, and then put me on a shelf next to someone else and I'll win out, because we've created this package where everything matters and everything is thought out and carefully curated. And I think about that a lot in like terms of like people who read digital comics and things like that, where it's like, I worry that everything is getting reduced down to a little thumbnail and be like, do I want to read that? It's like, that's not how you're supposed to look at a comic. You're supposed to see it on a shelf big and be able to pick it up and smell it and hold it. And like, that's I meet comic creators who are like, oh, I'm moving away from doing double page spreads because if you read it on an iPad, it's less impactful because you're looking at a full page and then 2 pages is actually shrunk down. And I was like, oh, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to write for an iPad. Like, I'm always going to write for the medium I want to be in. And that's comic books on a shelf. And like, so this book, I mean, people are going to read it digitally, like, cool, that's great. I want people to experience it how they want to experience it, but it's optimized for picking up off a shelf and feeling it. And like, we had, a lot of discussions about the paper quality and the weight of the book we wanted and the size, and just everything about it is thought out to be a physical item in the real world. And yeah, I think that there's something really wonderful about that package that is actualized for you to hold in your hands. I've always been romantic about that.
And there's also things like you can't stop progress, but you can control how out of control it gets, so, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I remember getting albums and going through the liner notes, right? Oh, yeah. And even like anyone who's of a certain age that's a little bit younger than us, if you tell them what a B-side is, they wouldn't have any clue, right?
Yeah.
And I find comics are the same way, because there's a certain thing about just holding it and hearing the pages and feeling the pages. And I was just seeing something on Twitter just the other day, even when they're recoloring reprints. I think it was a line of Conan, IDW's Conan, John Buscema's Conan,
Yeah.
where the colors are so bright and vibrant,
Mhm.
it changes the tone
Oh yeah.
of it, right? And so as a creator, when you kind of eschew kind of the original format of something, it totally changes how you want to have your story come across.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day because I just reread The Killing Joke, and I
Mm,
reread there's a new edition of The Killing Joke. It's not, and now it's a few years old. That's recolored, um, and I was talking to James Tynan about it, and I was like, he was like, "What did you think?" And I was like, "The colors are gorgeous," and he was like, "Yeah," he's like, "They are," and he was like, "But there's something about the old colors that are so psychedelic." And he's
mm,
like, and it's so, he's like, I understand why, James said, I understand why they didn't like them, because they're clash with this sort of tone of the story in a way. And he's like, but for me, it alters the tone of the story. And he's like, and when they go to these muted colors, he's like, the story becomes much darker. And he's like, and obviously it's a very dark story, but he's like, it becomes almost too dark for me. I need it to be candy colored. I need it to be like a kaleidoscope
right.
so that my senses are kind of overwhelmed by it. And he's like, when it's narrowed down to this muted palette. And I was looking at it and I was like, oh yeah, this is like, and I hadn't really contextualized that, but I've read the story a dozen times and I really do love it. But reading it this time, I was really like overwhelmed by how dark it is. And I was like, this is just, and obviously I've always known it's dark, but I was like, this is just oppressively brutal, nihilistic story. And then James being like, I need that candy colored filter over it. I was like, oh wow, like that's, I mean, if you ever want a better testament to coloring, like read the story in the original coloring and the new coloring and just be like, how did you feel after each one of them? Like, were you just staring at the wall for a
Mhm.
while when you read the new coloring? That's the power of coloring. Like it's a really interesting thing. The things we don't think about that subtly impact the experience of what we consume. Obviously, coloring is not something we don't think about, but that was a very concrete example of just being like, oh yeah, I had a very different psychological feeling on this book, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I was just like, I'm in a place where I'm thinking about these things more, and I don't think that's entirely it. I think it was a lot due to just the tone of the colors.
Yeah, and it happens in film too, because depending on who the cinematographer is, DOP, all that kind of stuff, it can
Sure.
totally change the tone of what you're watching.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
You know,
It's really, it's a funny thing that I mean, I think it goes to every part of making something, but it's the thing that I always tell young comic creators when they're the question you get asked most by aspiring comic creators is like, I have this idea that I love, but I feel nervous about talking to people about it because I don't want them to steal it. And I'm always like, people don't really steal other people's stories. Like, everyone wants to tell their own stories. They're not really like looking to just get stories. It's very rare, like almost unheard of that people do that. And I said, but I say to people, I was like, the other point is that like, if someone steals your story, it's going to be unrecognizable to you by the time they're done with it. Like, it's
yeah,
filtered through them and filtered through you. Like, you can put out the same book, and like, you see that when you make stuff, when you're like, oh, I think I just, someone will compare something I made to something else. And I'll go and I'll look at that thing and I'll be like, oh, I see how they see that, but like, I don't see that. And I'm like, well, I guess, the pitch for these two things is probably pretty similar, but like, at the end of the day, me and, Donnie Cates, or me and Kelly Thompson, or me and Chip Zdarsky, or me and, Mark Miller, or whoever, we're not going to, if you give us 4 sentences and be like, this is your story, you're going to get books that are almost unrecognizable to each other at the end of it. And that goes, that's a broad version of that, but I think it's true for everything. It's true for pencilers, and it's true for inkers, and it's true for colorists, and every step of the process is that the way that everybody adds to it impacts it so greatly. And that's kind of what's amazing about storytelling, I think.
yeah, no, I totally agree. I want to get back to what's the furthest place from here, though, because with the pandemic, you had to change up your marketing plan, and I
Mhm.
love the link with the songs that you have. Can you explain or talk to that?
Yeah. So we had, like I said before, we had this downtime where we were like in this panic of like, what are we going to do? How do we get people excited about this book? And I had an idea years ago to try and get bands to record songs to go with a comic, and it never quite worked out. And I was like, this is the time. And we had, the silver lining to the horrible cloud we were in was that not only did we have downtime to work on the book, but every band in the world was stuck at home and they couldn't do the things they do for a living, and they were sitting around trapped. And so I reached out to a bunch of bands that are huge influences on me and bands I love and bands that sort of served as the soundtrack for making this. And I was like, is there any chance you might want to record a song for this comic book? And everyone was just excited about the idea of making something and getting a chance to do something different. And so, yeah, we got a bunch of bands who we love to just immediately be like, yeah, let's go. Like, let's figure out studio time. Let's get a song together. And it's a funny thing. So every issue of the book has a deluxe version that's going to come with it. It's got a new cover that Tyler made for variant people, and then it's got a 7-inch with 2 songs from 2 bands who are big influences for us on the book and bands that we like. And it becomes this interesting thing from a creative standpoint, because they're bands who inspired us while we made the book, and now their music comes back around to be the soundtrack. And so
Right.
it's a glimpse behind the scenes of the making of the book, but also like they're going to inform the way people experience the book. And I really like that. But it's been really, it's been a ton of work, but I'm really excited about it. And the idea, we went to Image and we were like, we're going to do these 7-inches and we want to do this. And hopefully get record collectors and music fans to be buying comics. And Image, who are amazing and really just supportive of everything we do and just go above and beyond for us, they were like, this is great. Let's start the discussion of how to get these into record stores and get new people to find comics. And that's such a noble thing to do, to be like, how do we find new people? And I had to, I said to them, I was like, I love the instinct and I love what you guys are thinking. And like, sure, but we're coming, this conversation was during shops being locked down and closed. And I said, I love that, but no, like this is for comic shops. Like I want record collectors to be finding this, and I want them to eventually be coming in. And we discussed the idea of like doing the book and having a big, like, here's comic shop locator. Here's how you find your local comic shop. Here's how a comic shop works, and having that in the back of the book. But I was like, let's not do that now. Let's get those people and find them and drag them into a comic shop and get them to experience a comic shop and going in and buying a comic and buying their first book, maybe. I mean, for a lot of them, probably not, but like let them know where their local comic shop is, let them buy the book. And Image was so excited about that idea and so supportive. And so, yeah, we have these records. The songs are not going to be online for now. They're not on Spotify. They're not on iTunes. The bands aren't doing anything with them for a while. And the only place you can get them is going into your comic shop and throwing down some cash and walking out with a record. And so we're hoping that, we're going to be introducing some comic fans to the joys of vinyl and some awesome bands. And we're going to be introducing a lot of record fans and music fans to buying comics. And then on top of that all, like, I'm not trying to be a record label. We're not trying to like keep all these things in print and all this stuff. So, at the end of it, I was like, bands get all their songs back after the record's out. They can do whatever they want with them. They can put them online in 6 months, or, they can put them on their next records. Whatever they want to do is fine. And I said to all the bands, I was like, I don't need to make a ton of money off your work. Like, this to me is a cool thing to promote my book and to get people into comic shops and get people, talking about things. This doesn't have to be a profit source for me. You guys are doing it out of the goodness of your heart. And so we're donating all the money from all of them to charity, which I'm really excited about. So it's just to me, it's something I'm really excited. It's a weird thing because it's like the deluxe version of the book. And like, really most people are just going to get the normal book. But I was like, I get to work with a lot of my favorite bands. We do something that hopefully puts some new people in comic shops. Bands get a cool thing that maybe gets them some new listeners. and we give money to some really good causes. So I'm really excited about it.
Looks like we've frozen. Matthew, you still there?
Hey, we're back. Wait, I can't hear you. I don't. Hello? I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, great. That was weird. Like you were talking and then the internet gods froze you.
Yeah. I don't know what happened. I was like, so that's my point, and you were just staring at me, and I was like,
Yeah, I think we were in the both in the same situation.
Well, okay, so
yeah, so you were talking about you didn't want to make a lot of money off of it. You just wanted to have it as is.
Yeah. We were, so the records, we were not trying to, we have this thing that we're really proud of that is a very cool thing for Tyler and myself to have these records, and it's such a fanboyish thing to get to work with these bands, and it's something that we think is going to help comic shops a little bit and put new people in there and help the bands, and find new audience. And so it's all very cool, and like I was just like, that's enough of a reward for us, and let's just make these benefits for charity. And we worked with the bands to pick causes that we could all agree on, like good grassroots organizations where like donating all the money will have an impact and help people. And so for me, it's like, obviously our focus is on the book primarily and making the book. I'm really excited, but the records is such a nice, fun thing for us because it's like, it checks all these extra boxes of things that we're excited about, of like raising money for a good cause and helping out comic shops, hopefully, and getting to do something that we just think is really cool. And so getting to work with a bunch of bands we like. So it's fun beyond just a fun addition to the book or the interesting element of augmenting the reading experience with a soundtrack. It is something that I'm really happy with, and people seem to dig it so far. So I'm hoping they pick it up when it comes out.
No, it sounds great. And it kind of reminds me of like, you're just making a film in a way, right? Like you have certain arcs or certain scenes would be informed by whatever song or band you've picked, right? And it just makes it that much more cinematic.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been sort of in love with, I mean, I'm a big film nerd, but I'm always been in love with the idea that like my two passions more than film or anything else are music and comics. And I love the way they complement each other, the way that music informs emotion and tells a story but with no visual input, and the way that comics does the same but with no audio input. And so just smashing them together, it's like yeah, this is the full package. This is everything that I love together, and it works well. There's not this strange overlap. I think about, I reread the book listening to the first 7-inch, and I was like, oh no, this is awesome. Like this works so perfectly. Right. This is exactly what we want people to be experiencing while they read it. And so I'm really excited to see that and see how people experience that. And also, I'm hoping that people are like, come back to me and are like, I think this is a better soundtrack to your book. Like this is what I listen to, and see how other people experience it. That to me is like really fun. And I'm hoping that like that inspires people to just be like, no, I was listening to this, this classical music or this jazz or this like, death metal record, and it like it works perfectly. And like I want to see that stuff. That to me is very cool.
Excellent. And you've also got some really cool variant covers. And this name took me by surprise. Brian Michael Bendis. Like, how'd you score that one?
Yeah, Brian is the big curveball of the covers. Brian is my favorite comic creator. He is the reason I make comics. I don't, I have a lot of people that I love and who influenced me, but Brian is the one where I read a book and was like, I want to do this. This is what I want to do for my life. And like, I've always loved his stuff, and like going back to his early stuff, the crime stuff that he drew a lot of it himself, Jinx and Goldfish. And the only original page of art that I own is a page from Jinx. He's just he's just such an influence. And so when the book was coming out, he's been, and beyond that, like when I was first starting, I introduced myself to him, and I like was self-publishing comics, and I was like, you know, can I give you this? And he was so kind to me. And then when my first Creator book came out, We Can Never Go Home, you know, I emailed him and was like, I got his email and emailed him and was like, can I send this to you? And he was like, I just bought it. And he like sent me a picture of it in his house. And I was like, it was like one of the great moments.
That's cool.
And yeah, it's amazing. And he's just that guy who's supportive of new voices always, and always trying to be on top of things. And he was just a big champion for me coming in at Marvel, and a big champion for me at my time at Marvel, and like a big supporter of me coming over to DC when he moved over. And like, he's just been someone who's been so influential to me, but also supportive of my stuff. And so I was like, let me be really abusive of that and ask for the totally ask for the favor that's too far. And so I texted him and was like, hey, this is a weird question. Would you want to draw a cover for our book? And he just wrote back and was like, yep. And that was it. And I was like, is he serious?
Nice.
Like
Nice.
I spent a while being like, I don't know if he's working. And then he did it, and it's awesome. And I love the cover. And he was like, he sent it to me and he was like, I haven't drawn anything in decades. He's like, so, you know, take it with a grain of salt. And I love it. And I was like, oh, I love this cover so much. Like, it's so amazing. And I just love it so much. And, you know, we put it out and people were like, that cover rules. And I was like, Brian, everybody loves it. Like, everybody thinks it's awesome. So yeah, that's a really, we've been really lucky with all the people who've come and done covers for us. We're kind of just reaching out to people we're friends with whose work we love, and people who we just think are cool, to be like, do you want to draw our characters? Because that's just a fun thing to get to see. So but that for me was definitely a pie in the sky one that came true. So
no, that's pretty cool. Get to work with, you know, one of your heroes.
For sure, yeah, it's been awesome. So but we have a bunch of really cool ones, and I'm really excited. And you know, we wanted some people who don't normally get asked to do other covers. Like, it's just not something that people think of. So Brian was the first, but actually Jonathan Hickman, who is another artist whose work I love. And, you know, like, everyone is like, he's one of my favorite writers, but also like he draws, and I love the books that he's drawn, and I love his design sense. And I was like, John, would you do a cover? And he was like, yep. I was like, this is weird that these guys are saying yes. But so he actually has a cover on issue 2, which is awesome.
And it's weird because that's another kind of bit of synergy between comics and music, because depending on what band you like, you would have someone playing drums on a track or singing background vocals. So those kind of opportunities to work together with not only your peers, but sometimes your heroes is pretty fantastic. And also then kind of leads to new bouts of creativity.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's a real interesting and fun chance to, like, we're trying to just work with people we think are cool, and also like seeing their stuff come in inspires us. And it's like hearing someone cover your song and be like, oh, they did it so much better, like they went hard at this part, or they focused on this. And so it's really influenced us. I won't spoil anything. It's a little too behind the scenes for right now, but there's a couple people who did covers for us that I called Tyler after us. I was like, this thing that 2 people have drawn, like, we have to make that a bigger part of the book. Like, this is something that 2 people really focused and noticed and cared about. We have to spend more time on that. And so we actually are it changed, you know, who was doing variant covers changed the actual structure of the back half of the first arc. So
no, that's great.
Yeah, it's been cool and fun to see all the different takes on the book. Has been really awesome.
And it's also because one of the cool things about, you know, being creative is that you do stuff in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
And there are different stages of, I don't even want to say validation, but where you kind of like, okay, we're on the right track. And sometimes you never know, right?
Oh yeah.
Sometimes you never know. But it's kind of cool that when you're doing stuff and then your peers are saying, hey, I like this, but also then picking out something that you're not even centered on, right? Yeah. And then realizing, oh, it touched someone in the audience who does what I do in a certain way. It then lets you kind of realize that, you know what, you're on the right track.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've had the same thing this week, this month with like, I mean, me and Tyler have been working on this book for so long. And it's just the two of us. Like, it's just us. And then at a certain point, we were like, well, we have to get it lettered. And so Hassan, our letterer, came on. And so he was the third person who'd seen it. And the only other person who'd seen it, a couple people, Eric Stevenson and Jeff Boyson at Image, had read it. And so we were like, this has been seen by a total of 5 people, and 3 of them physically make it, and 2 of them are the publisher. Like, we just had no idea. You hit a point where you're totally in the world, and you're like, people are like, oh, is your new book good? And like, they say that very casually, like it's just a conversational piece. And I would be like, I don't know. I have no idea. Like, I'm so immersed in it that I couldn't tell you if it's good or not. It's like, I felt like people asking me that is like going into a kitchen while a baker is like adding eggs to a cake, and people will be like, is your cake tasty? And they'd be like, I don't know. It's not a cake. It's like sugar and flour and cocoa powder. Like, I don't know if it tastes good. And so actually getting out to send, I mean, I've been sending it to retailers and to like our peers, like other comic creators and friends. And the first few people who hit me back, I sent it to 2 of my closest friends who I work with a lot on stuff, which is Donnie Cates and James Tynan. And both of them came back very effusive and were like, dude, this book is amazing. And it was really like I could exhale a little bit, but then the voice in the back of your head goes like, those are 2 of your best friends. Like, they're going to tell you it's great. And I was like, I need to find a person who I'm close enough with, who will be honest with me, who will read it and I can trust, but will also tell me if it sucks. And like, I sort of looked at all my friends and I was like, it's Kelly Thompson. And like Kelly, I wrote X-Men with Kelly Thompson, and she's one of my favorite writers and a very good friend of mine, but she is very quick to tell. And I try and do the same for her when she shows me something and I'm like, this sucks. She's appreciative of it. It hurts to hear, but she does the same for me. And so I sent it to Kelly and I was like, Kelly, this isn't like, give me a nice quote and pat me on the back. This is like, have I spent a year and a half of my life making something that everyone's going to hate? And she got back to me and she called me and she was like, Matt, I love it so much. And that to me was like such a sigh of relief. And so, I felt like that was a huge burden lifting, having Kelly. And not that Kelly is the arbiter of all things good, but to me, she's like the person I can go to who will tell me if it sucks. And now we've given it to a few people, and everyone has been so kind and effusive, and it's great. And I can tell there's some people who are like, this is weird. And you're like, yeah, it's supposed to be weird. And they're like, I don't really dig weird stuff. And you're like, okay, that's cool. And they're like, I like it, it's good, but it's a little strange for me. Or some people are like, I wish you'd done this. And like, I'm trying to get notes and feedback from people. And mostly it's been really effusive, and that's a great feeling. It's sort of the best reaction to anything I've ever written, from giving it to friends, and comic shops have been awesome and been really effusive. But like, yeah, like you were saying, like seeing people, what they bring back from it is so enlightening. And having people be like, I liked this thing, that's a subtle thing, and you're like, oh yeah. And having other people be like, I didn't understand this. And some of those were like, you're not supposed to understand that. And some of those are like, yeah, we'll get to that. Like, we'll sort that out for people. So it's having the feedback from readers and people you trust is it's one of the reasons I love making serialized comics, because it does. I mean, I'm not on Twitter asking for every X-Men fan to be like, tell me what I should do next. You can't do that. And you have to, I think most comic creators agree that if you told the fans where you were going, they would say, please don't go there. But then they're happy when you do, because it's, it's about the actual creation and not just the idea of the creation. But I think there is something great about doing monthly comics where the feedback does start to inform what you're doing, and seeing what resonates with people. It is a little more improvisational than like making a graphic novel or making a movie or writing a novel or something would be. And that's very cool to me.
No, for sure. Now we're going to wrap up, but I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Name your top 3 movie soundtracks.
Top 3 movie soundtracks. Number 1 is easy, Star Wars.
Okay, which one though? Which episode?
Episode 4, A New Hope.
Okay.
It's just it's the most iconic. You hum it anywhere in the world, people know what it
Yes.
is. Like, you know, the metal scene.
Oh yeah, that doesn't get played enough, personally.
It doesn't get played enough. And to me, it's funny that a few years ago there was a video going around where they stripped out the score, and so you could just hear it and what it would be like there. And it's
Right.
everyone just standing there, and like the sound of feet shuffling, and
Yeah.
like people clearing their
Murmurs.
throat. Yeah,
Yeah.
murmurs. And it plays really funny, and it speaks about what score is, because it's like, oh, this scene feels hilarious without a score. But then I went back and I watched the movie like a week after that, and I got teary-eyed at the score. I was just like, this is it. Like, this is so powerful. And like, and I still like that is a score that chokes me up, and that to me is a huge thing. Full Metal Jacket. uh
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Full
Yeah.
Metal Jacket is like, it's the first time I remember, and I think for other people it's probably going to be stuff like Psycho or The Shining, where the scores are very unnerving and stuff. But Full Metal Jacket, especially in the end, like the sniper scenes and stuff, like the score is terrifying, and really like, it's just like dysrhythmic with weird noises mixed in, and like it really starts to get under your skin in a way that is really powerful in a great way. And the one I talk about the most recently is a weird one, but it's Dunkirk.
Okay. Yeah. I find Nolan's soundtracks to be amazing. Like,
Yeah.
whoever he picks,
Mhm.
they just fit whatever he's doing like a glove.
Yeah. And Dunkirk, to me, I didn't pick up on it the first time, but the second time I watched it, I was like, this is basically just a drone. Like, it's just a low key that just increases in frequency and tension. And I was like, it's a 2 hour. I mean, I don't know how long that movie is, like 210 or 220. It's like over 2 hours of just a slowly rising panic attack. And it's like, I would never listen to it outside the movie,
Right.
but to me, it's really, it's as effective in storytelling as you can get, of just like, this is a nonstop tension filled thing, and this score amplifies everything by 1,000%. And then, but that feels weird because it's not something I'd listen to. So I want to pick something that I actually, a big one for me when I was growing up, and I still listen to sometimes, is the Judgment Night soundtrack.
I don't think I've seen that. All right. So I don't know. I'm not familiar with it.
It's a really weird one.
Okay.
I mean, it's a remake. It's basically, they don't call it that, but it's a remake of North by Northwest, essentially, but with like, it's just like a weird kind of action movie version of that. But the soundtrack was all like punk rock, indie rock bands and rappers together.
Nice.
And so it was like all these new songs. And there's like Faith No More, who are one of my favorite bands, do a song with Booyah Tribe that's really good. But there's just songs that are like, there's a Dinosaur Jr., Del Funky Homo Sapien song that's so good.
Nice.
And there's a De La Soul Teenage Fan Club do a song.
Right.
And like, some of it I'm like, I don't need to listen to the Ice-T Slayer song too much. Like, it's not really my thing. But like the really good songs are crazy good. And it's also this thing, it's like, this wouldn't exist if it weren't for this. And so at the time I was like, this is so cool that this exists in this very unique way. And so that's actually a soundtrack that I listen to still sometimes and really like. That's more, you can throw it on because it's songs rather than a score. So
right. Yeah. I find I have Spotify playlists, and when I'm drawing or writing, I like to put in certain soundtracks or certain tunes, and then that just gets me through the creative process sometimes.
Sure. It's funny that you said that, because like a lot of my peers do that, like, are like, oh, I listen to this thing. And I used to try and do that because I can't listen to stuff that has lyrics unless I like.
I'm the same with you. If I'm writing, no lyrics.
But I found that when I start, like, I'd listen to the Indiana Jones soundtrack and it would be influencing. I'd be like, this needs to be more adventurous and swashbuckling. And I was like, no, I'm starting to try and write the movie this is a soundtrack to. And so then I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And so I just listened to instrumental, like I either listen to jazz or classical or like instrumental rock music.
Hmm.
And the funniest to me is I said to someone, I was like, yeah, I listen to a lot of this band Explosions in the Sky. It's instrumental rock, but it's very epic and sort of orchestral. And I was like, they're perfect because they aren't influencing me to a movie. And someone was like, they did all the music to Friday Night Lights. And I was like, don't tell me that. Like, I don't want to know that. Now I'm going to write all my comics like football comics. But they were like, yeah, they've done soundtracks to a bunch of movies. But I'm like, I can't go rewatch those movies because
Right.
they're such an important band for my listening to their songs. But yeah, it's a tightrope for me because I know other people are like, yeah, just listen to, like, they'll see a movie and be like, great soundtrack, I'm going to write to that. And I'd be like, I would be writing that by the end of the night. I'd have written that movie again, and I can't do that. I just absorb it too much.
Yeah, but it's great because it like comics, movies, it just gets every sensory thing that you have as a human being, and then that brings out the emotion, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And
Yeah.
I think that's what makes consuming this stuff so beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really, I always feel really lucky to get to be in a position to make these things, but also to get to be an experience of just experiencing them. And you know, I meet so many people who don't love music and don't love comics, and I feel bad. I'm like, oh, it's the thing that brings me the most joy in the world. Like, I don't know. I feel bad that you don't love this like I do.
No, it's true. I just remember, was the last time I think I saw two of these. One was the music of Warner Brothers, and they was here in Toronto, and they played old Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Oh, it's awesome.
And all the music accompanied that. And then the other one was Star Wars, where just everything was being done orchestrally. And I think Anthony Daniels was the host. And then they showed clips from the movies. And you're just like, yeah, it's not Mozart, but it is.
Yeah, for sure. It is the modern. I grew up with the son of a very famous violinist, like a world-renowned violinist. And I said to him once, I said to his dad, I said, you know, do you ever feel weird that like classical music is not as prominent anymore, but like it doesn't have the stage? And he was like, it does. It's just in movies now. And he's like, you know, it's the importance of classical music is very much still present in in movies. And he's like, and that's how it should be. He said, like, there's a lot. He's like, he loved playing, you know, the New York Philharmonic and, you know, all these things. And he's like, but there's a populist thing to scoring films with classical music that is really beautiful, that it should be for the people, and it should be evocative. And if they have to have a movie in front of them to understand and appreciate it, like, that's fine. It's not reductive of that. It's not dismissive of that. It's beautiful. And I really like that. I really love that he was like, yeah, the melding of movie doesn't lessen the music. It just puts it in front of more people, and that's amazing. And that's something that I try and sort of take to heart all the time. It's just like, putting art in front of people is so important and so essential for their survival and safety and the health of our society, that like, we should never look down on people who are trying to get art to people. It's always something that should be celebrated and promoted.
No, I definitely agree. And before we wrap up, what can fans look forward to from you and Tyler, other than more issues of your book?
Okay, so I'll start with Tyler. Tyler has a book that, besides What's the Furthest Place From Here, which comes out November 10th from Image Comics, Tyler has an awesome book that he did this year called Dead Dogs Bite, from Dark Horse, which comes out, I think, in the next week, maybe 2 weeks, in a hardcover. And it is, I tell people, I'm like, oh, it's one of my favorite books of the last 5 years, easily. And they're like, oh, it's because he's your buddy. And then, like, you know, I was like, you know, Scott Snyder, Brian Bendis, like, these big name creators were like, this is a great book and you should check it out. I'm not just talking about my buddy. Like, it is a really unique, special book that I think people slept on a little bit in single issues. It was coming out during the pandemic, and it's hard to cut through the static of that and stuff. But like, I think it's going to be like a huge sleeper hit for when it's out in the hardcover. And then I have a ton of stuff coming out from DC coming up. I have a new series called Task Force Z starting in October, which is really exciting. It's me and Eddie Barrows doing a sort of zombie take on the Suicide Squad with Red Hood leading the team. Me and James Tynan and Otto Schmidt, who I made Hawkeye Freefall with, have a book called DC versus Vampires, coming out the same day, late October. That's a really fun, like, fate of the DC universe, anything goes kind of slugfest. I'm doing a bunch of stuff in Detective Comics, which I'm really excited about. And I have a series coming out now called Joker Presents a Puzzle Box, which is all different, a very strange take on the Joker as a storyteller telling stories about Gotham's greatest villains, with like a bunch of my favorite artists doing these short stories that are all connected.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's a real weird one, but it's really fun. It's this big mystery as told by like the Joker in a police interrogation room, telling stories to the police to try and steer them in different directions. And that's pretty much it. And then we're just focused on what's the Furthest Place From Here, which we're really excited for people to check out in November when it launches.
No, yeah. For those of you who are listening and watching, I recommend you go pick the book up. It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Matthew, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon. This was a great time chatting and catching up, and best of luck moving forward.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone for listening and checking it out, and hopefully checking out the book.
All right, great. Thank you.